I don't know.
Get on it, Aaron. Hey MisFits, welcome again to another episode. Today we are going to talk about habits. Yay! But before that, you should probably know who we are. Nami and Pavi here to help you crush unemployment and find your professional purpose. And today we have a special guest, so we're doing another Ask the Expert series. And Pavi, do you want to tell us?
Well, everybody, welcome Aaron. Thank you so much for being here. He is the owner and principal of a company called Mass Habits Consulting. He basically develops optimal strategies for companies in making habits around good habits, mostly because we don't really have those. He went to the University of Guelph. I've heard of it. I don't know.
Who has not heard of it?
She went there too. That's why she's like, calm down.
I know.
But yeah,
Two of us in the world.
I know. So he's co-authored a bunch of books and authored some, been to a bunch of conferences where he's spoken. So could you tell us more?
What's my story? So it's going to get a little bit dark. Yeah, bad starting point. But when I was really young, I was growing up and my mother smoked a lot, right? And I was talking with her and I'd say, Mom, you know, why are you smoking so much? Because I was that kid who always asked why. Yeah. And I never shut up when I was asking why. So I said, why are you smoking so much? And she said, Aaron, honey, it's just a bad habit. And I was like, okay, that's an answer. Wait a minute, that's not really a good answer. And the thing that really bothered me, and it took me a really long time to realize this, was that so when you say something is a bad habit, it's like, yeah, I'm doing that, I recognize that it's me who's doing it, but ultimately I don't really have control over it. And that like blew my mind. So I spent a long time studying that, and I just kept focusing on that question, like, how is it possible that you can have something that you do that you're not in control of? So then I ended up going through, doing a master's in philosophy in Belgium, and then I went to Guelph.
What is that?
It's like Middle Earth. There are hobbits there, that's all you need to know.
Did a PhD. In my PhD I was focusing on habit development. Ended up writing a book on it. And it was this like really academic, like kind of archaic way of thinking about habits, but it really got me fascinated even more and in more detail about the specific things that people can do to develop better habits.
That's the whole reason why we're doing this episode, because we've, especially when we were unemployed, you tend to get in a negative space, right? So a lot of us sort of go down this hole and we start to develop these habits, and a lot of times you're on autopilot, so you don't realize that you have these habits, you can't even identify it, and so we're especially prone to that when you're in that bad space. So today we're going to talk about not only how to crush those bad habits, but also how to actually adopt good ones.
So habits are super tricky because like trying to develop a new habit or even kick a bad habit is just like, it's super hard. And I guess it's more important to know how it works. So I know you talk about like the habit loop. Can you go into detail about that?
Sure. So there's a great book by Charles Duhigg. And a lot of people have read it, and it's amazing because it's so simple and easy to read. So there's this habit loop, and the way that he describes it, I believe the language he uses is cue, routine, reward. Right? So everything that we do, even the way in which you articulate words, that's a habit. So for something like, say for example, smoking that we talked about earlier with my mom, the cue was that she would go on break. And so her friends at work would say, hey, do you want to come on break? And that meant that she was going to go outside and have a cigarette. So she would go get her cigarettes and then go outside and have the reward of not only being social with her friends, but also getting the pleasure from the cigarette itself.
Right.
And so she was getting multiple rewards for that particular cue. And so that's why it was so hard for her to break it.
Yeah.
It's because in order to break that habit, she would have to be less social. That's one of the things that we need to think about is like, what kind of rewards are we getting when we've engaged in this habit loop? And how can we substitute that reward for something else? So you've seen people do things like putting pen lids on the ends of cigarettes so they're not actually inhaling anything, but they're still going through the same routine. And they're still getting another like reward out of it, which is being social, because most of the time you're smoking, you're being social, right? Because one of the things that people don't realize is that if I say this, start a new habit, you're like, oh yeah, no big deal, I'll just do something for a couple of weeks and it'll be a habit, right? But it's really hard. It's really hard. And the reason why people say that it's 2 weeks to develop a new habit, but it's because after around 2 weeks, you don't really think about it anymore. And so it becomes subconscious. One of the other things that's really important is that you can never just totally replace a habit.
Right.
But it's much better to just modify a current habit that you have. We can talk about that in more detail. But
Okay. There's two different ways to tackle these things, right? Because when it's a habit that already exists, it's a question of actually becoming aware enough of what that cue is.
Right.
But then I feel like with habits that you're trying to develop, do you actually have to think about, okay, this is the cue that I'm actively going to use to like trigger the response? I don't know if that's easier or harder, whether it's easier to just like, identify the cue that already exists or easier to make up a cue. I don't know, but we can go into that in more detail later.
With Nami.
no, but I think that's really important because oftentimes we think, okay, so if that's the structure of something, then I just have to start at the beginning and then go to the end. But it's actually better to start at the end and work backwards.
Yeah.
So for example, something I've talked about a few times with other groups is that if you're trying to say read a really tough book that you don't want to read, and there's lots of them, but you know that you have to read them, and it kind of sucks, right? So what do? Well, you can just say, I'm going to be a good person and read the book, and I'm going to feel fulfilled as a result of that, right? But that's not how we work, right?
Yeah.
If you think about things in terms of like intrinsic and extrinsic rewards, and if you think about things like immediate rewards and long-term rewards, oftentimes we think, oh, I know that it's a good long-term reward, and so I'll just do the thing that I'm supposed to do. But that's just silly, and it's making it much harder on yourself. So for example, with that book, you should reward yourself every single time you make some sort of milestone. And as you start off, it can be something as simple as like, you read a page, or if it's like a really bad book, I picked up the book, or like I thought about picking up the book. Right? If you think about that and you think about rewarding yourself for that, and you can do something as simple as like have a jar of jelly beans. You look at the book and you're like, I looked at your book, and you grab a jelly bean out of the jar, right? You reward yourself for it. The crazy thing is that you'll start actually just liking reading that book, even though you're not immediately rewarding yourself over time. But don't think about that to begin with, right? Like this is about tricking ourselves to do the right thing, right?
Right.
So BJ Fogg talks about this. So he's another fantastic writer on habits, and I highly recommend that you check out his website.
There may be some habits that have a really negative effect, like a cascading effect on the rest of our day. And then on the flip side, I've also heard that when I read The Power of Habit, he talked about this concept of a keystone habit where, there's that one anchor that kind of, if you want to flip the script on it, you can adopt a good habit that then has a positively cascading effect on the rest of your day. So can you talk a bit about how we can maybe identify what a good keystone habit would be?
Sure. So one way of thinking about it is if you have a negative set of habits, it's really hard to recognize down the line what has influenced you before, right? But we can often say like, I'm in a bad mood, right? We can often identify that about ourselves. And so we can use a category in order to make sense of our current experience. Because sometimes you're in a bad mood because you haven't slept appropriately, and yet you think it's because of a conversation you just had with someone, right? And so you attribute your bad mood to the conversation and not because you haven't slept appropriately the night before, right? So I think there's like one thing that's probably the most powerful thing that you can do to get out of that constant cycle, and it's simply cultivating an attitude of gratitude. So it's so simple. Anytime that you're in a negative situation, send an email of thanks to someone you know. It doesn't matter what it is.
Thanks,
right?
man.
Send an email or a text message or turn to someone, because what happens is your brain chemistry actually changes enough for you to focus more positively on what's happening. And so it's a trick that you can use whenever you want, right? And it's so simple, right? Like, thanks for inviting me on the show.
Yeah.
This is great. I really appreciate it. Not that I had all these negative thoughts.
They gave us the feels, so that worked. So a lot of our viewers are unemployed or looking for a job, or are entrepreneurs that don't have a schedule, don't know what they're doing, kind of like us. We don't feel positive all the time, and we're like a breeding ground for just negativity.
Yeah.
So is there like a secret sauce to get out of a bad habit?
So I think it's the space that you're in. Because oftentimes we won't really recognize the fact that there are triggers all around us all the time that are putting us into a negative mood, right? And so if you can change the space that you're in, just by changing the environment, changing like you going to a coffee shop or you being in a different place, it allows you to think and new about your particular situation. There are certain things that people have talked about, like implementation intentions, right? It's a fancy word for saying, if I'm in this position, then I'm going to do this, right? And the reason why that's so important is because every single time that you're put in a position where you want to do something right, if you have a decision to make, you have a point of possible failure, right? So if you say, okay, like for example, tomorrow morning I want to go running, right? And it seems like it's such a simple thing. It's like wake up, decide to go running. But that's not true, right? Because there's wake up and not hit snooze.
Yawn.
There's go and find your running clothes. There's go and find your shoes. There's grab your keys. There's grab all of this stuff. And the problem is at each point you can say no, right? But if you change your environment in such a way, you change the space that you're in such a way that you can't say no anymore, then you're much more likely to do what you want.
Right.
So for example, you wake up in the morning and maybe you have to send like a message to a friend who's also running, who maybe isn't even in the same city as you, right? But you just say, I'm going running right now. And that friend then obliges you to send that message every single morning, right? So then you have to get up. Then you're much more likely to do it because you're not making a decision anymore.
Right.
Right?
All right, thank you so much guys for watching. We really hope you enjoyed our like interview with Aaron. Thank you Aaron for being on the show. This is part of a continuing series, so you're gonna catch more of him, so don't worry, don't go away anywhere. But in the meantime, please subscribe to our channel. We're part of Biz Latte now, so a bigger family. Hit subscribe, catch us on social media, and let us know if you have any questions. We'll see you next week with a brand new episode. Bye.